Hi everyone, my name is Ella and I work at ScreenSkills. Welcome to our free online training. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Industry Great session with director Tim Wardle and exec producer Tom Barry, who made the brilliant documentary series Three Identical Strangers.
Thanks so much for joining us today. My name's Tom Barry. I was lucky enough to be asked to come on board Three Identical Strangers as one of the executive producers in late 2016. Which I had to double check because it seems such an unfathomably long time ago. Perhaps even more unbelievably, Tim and others had done 4 years' work researching, developing and pitching for funding before the point I came on board. And by my maths, that takes us back to 2012. So whilst we sit here today and talk about the film and all the great things it's done, it can be easy to overlook the journey that everyone went on to get to this point. So we thought it'd be interesting to share a bit about the process of making the film with you today, from start to finish. Key to the discussion is the context that by and large, the majority of the team, from Tim to the editor, the producers, and 2 of the 3 execs, had never made a feature documentary before. We were television producers who had mainly worked in the UK. So this was quite a roller coaster for all of us. We'll be splitting the discussion down and talking about the development, the production, and finally the release of the film. Tim's going to talk us through everything, and I'm going to jump in with the occasional question, but there'll be a short Q&A at the end of each section rather than the very end. So as Ella said, do send any questions you'd like to ask as we go. Right, to start off, we're going to mess with the chronology a bit and jump to the end of the process before coming back to discuss the somewhat torturous development experience that led to the film being commissioned. So let's go back to the very beginning and how you first heard of the story.
So what happened was I was working as head of development for Raw. I've spent about half my career in development. So, you know, I used to run docs development for the Beeb, for Blast, Century, and then I was at Raw doing that. And I've kind of tended to switch between development and directing stuff, which I found to be a really good combination. I know some people hate development, but I really love it. And a producer called Grace Hughes Hallett came into Raw with this story of these 3 boys separated at birth and then reunited by coincidence at the age of 19. And she started telling the story, and it was immediately clear to me it was probably the best documentary story that I'd ever heard. And I genuinely thought she was exaggerating. Quite often when people come in to pitch stuff, they kind of really oversell. But if anything, she was underselling it when we looked into it. I also couldn't really believe that no one had told the story before, because it was just so crazy. And I don't know, when you're running development for a documentary company, you kind of pride yourself on being across all these kind of pop culture stories, and I'd never heard of it before. And I'd studied psychology at university, so we couldn't believe it hadn't been told before. And actually, when we started looking into it, quite early on, we discovered that people had tried to tell it before, and there were various conspiracies around previous attempts to tell it. Certainly in the US, there were 3 attempts by major US networks to tell the story, and in one case, a documentary sort of equivalent of like Newsnight had made a whole film, and at the last minute it was pulled. So there was these kind of mysterious stories around why this story had never been told before, and various people we spoke to said, "You'll never be able to finish this film. People will stop you. It'll be shut down."
And why did you keep going? What was it about the story that kind of just moved you towards it?
Obviously, you hear stuff like that, and it makes you even more intrigued. But I think also there was the main thing was that it was a great story, but it had layers. You know, there are a million great stories out there, but ones that really have kind of depth to them and that you can play out over a period of time. You know, for a feature documentary, my personal feeling is that, you know, to make a documentary over an hour is really tricky. You know, it has to be an incredibly strong story, and this just had these layers. You know, it wasn't just about superficially, there's a very pop culture story about these brothers separated and reunited, but beneath it, there's a much deeper story about family, about nature versus nurture, about free will versus destiny. And that's the kind of the meat of those kind of those stories. You know, they need to have depth, and it can't just be a superficially fun story with no depth. And I guess it sort of just combined a lot of interests I have. You know, as I said, I studied psychology at university. I'm one of 3 brothers, not triplets. I was going out with, well, now married to a Jewish psychotherapist. So all these kind of elements kind of combined, really.
And so, as you say, it is the dream documentary story, really, isn't it? And when you started sort of developing it and taking it to people, what was the reaction from commissioners?
Well, we had initial interest from Channel 4, and that was partially because the commissioner there, Sarah Ramsden, had actually looked at an aspect of the story, two other twins in the study, and so had spent some time trying to get a film off the ground with Simon Dixon, I think, when he was the commissioner at Channel 4, but it never happened for a variety of reasons. But to be honest, outside of that, it was really, really hard. I mean, we went to all the major feature doc funding places you go in the UK, and I basically wasted, there's no other way of putting it, 4 years of my life trying to, having endless meetings and people saying, yeah, maybe. And the key sticking points, I've got some great rejection letters, which I should have actually dug out for this talk. But, one saying, we don't think it's commercial enough, this story. But the main issue people have was, we don't know what's the third act of the film. You've spelt out, the first half or the first 2/3, but where's it going to go? And I was sort of like, well, that's a documentary. You don't know what the end is going to be before you start it. But it was really hard. And you look back at it now, and particularly in the current climate where everyone is scrabbling around for factual ideas and the next Three Identical Strangers or the next Tiger King, it's kind of inconceivable that people wouldn't have been biting your hand off for this. But the truth is, it was really bloody hard to get any interest. And what happened is we managed to get some funding, a small amount of funding from the Sundance Institute. This is before Channel 4, actually, the Sundance Institute and the Wellcome Trust. And that enabled us to shoot a short taster. You can see, it's very, very rough, that taster, but incredibly helpful to have that kind of sizzle when it comes to kind of selling projects. And we just cut in a load of kind of random stock archive. And with that, again, we still couldn't get any interest from feature doc funders in the UK, or some interest, but they would never actually commit any money. So finally we went to the US, and it seems kind of crazy now with the benefit of hindsight, like why wouldn't you go there? Because it's an American story. And I think because, again, my background's in UK TV, and I just I think I was slightly intimidated by the US, to be honest. For someone who spent their entire career working in the UK, I kind of wanted to try and fund it here, but it was very, very difficult, and we couldn't get any interest.
How much of that, sorry, Tim, to jump in there, but how much of that do you think not being able to get it funded in the UK was because it was an American story, an incredible American story, but, an American story nonetheless?
I mean, maybe that wasn't an element, I guess. But I mean, bear in mind, we're trying to get theatrical funding for a theatrical documentary, and generally the US stories tend to be bigger and tend to play better, more strongly internationally. I genuinely don't know. Like I said, we had Channel 4 came on board pretty early on, but they only had about a third of the budget. I mean, really, if you want to do a film for cinema release these days, the budgets are normally kind of 1.2 million upwards. You can make them obviously for a lot cheaper, but there are various costs involved, and certainly doing it through a production company and not as a kind of independent small outfit, we needed a decent budget, and we just couldn't raise that in the UK. And it was kind of like a revelation when we took it to the US. I mean, instantly, I think we only took it to two places, and both were like, there was a sort of bidding war. And
how far through the process was that? How many years into the 4 years did you go to America?
That was 4 years in, I think. It was just this project that I kept ticking along in the background, Grace and I did, and that we couldn't kind of bear to let go of because it was so obviously a brilliant idea. There were also issues with access to the brothers. I mean, I think that actually, in retrospect, the 4 years really helped in that it allowed us to build a relationship with them. And when you see what they've been through, their story, you understand why they might find it hard to trust people, and particularly at the time that they were initially famous, a lot of people came to them and promised them all kinds of things and said, we're going to make you, stars and this kind of thing. It never happened. So I think it actually helped in the long run, but it was incredibly frustrating at the time. And it was kind of a good lesson in terms of, if you really have a story you really believe in, to keep fighting for it. I mean, sometimes rejection is a sign that you should walk away and you shouldn't obsess your entire career about one thing. But actually, in this case, it was good that we kept it going. And it was really interesting, we ended up with these two offers, one for a streamer, a very, high profile streamer, which was more money, and one from this company, CNN Films, who'd done Blackfish, and were going to come in with Channel 4 and kind of partner with them, and were open to it having a cinema release. The thing is, if you make a film for a streamer, the chances are it might get a token cinema release, but most of those films don't, because they obviously want them for their, Hulu or Netflix or, Apple or, whoever. They want them for their platform. They don't want them to play in the cinemas. So it was less money, but in the long term, it ended up being the right call.
And how important did Sundance give you a little bit of money early on? Was that
Sundance gives a tiny bit. Sundance Institute. So there's Tabitha Jackson there, who used to be at Channel 4, used to run Channel 4 Arts, and is now the boss actually at Sundance. But she was at the Sundance Institute, gave us, I don't know, it was like $10,000, but enabled us to go to the US, shoot that taster, and kind of cut it. And I think having the Sundance name attached is never a bad thing.
And I guess it was also an indication, it's not a guarantee, right, that they are interested in the film, which going forward was kind of really encouraging.
I mean, yeah, it would definitely, getting the interest from Sundance was the first point I felt, the first point I really felt kind of justified, and I felt like, yeah, this isn't a waste of time. Someone other than us and someone else who's worked on the story before at Channel 4 really believes in this. So it was, and sometimes, you need those little wins where you can take them, even if it's not the full amount, just someone going, yeah, we believe in this, was really kind of helpful and gave us the impetus to kind of kick on.
Yeah. Okay. Getting some questions coming through, which I thought would probably be good to ask you now.
Before we move on to kind of the production itself.
Yeah. So where are we? We've got one asking, how did you approach the contribs? So you sort of touched on that briefly then, but they, as you say, they're incredibly sensitive, everything they've been through.
So Grace had reached out to them and kind of made contact with one of the brothers. I think she went to Bobby first, and they weren't really talking at the time. Their relationship was in a really bad way, as it was quite a way through our filming as well. And it was a really painstaking process, and hats off to Grace. I mean, she found the story, she had the title for the film, she negotiated access to the brothers, or certainly provisional access. But it was really tricky with them, and the more you can meet people without cameras and the longer you can spend building a relationship with them and their friends and family, the better. And she, when we filmed that taster with them, I remember, Bobby got up and walked out halfway through and had a massive kind of hissy fit with us in the middle of it. So it was really kind of on a knife edge the whole way. And even when we actually finally got funding and started filming, I thought it was 50-50 whether they were going to turn up for the first day of interview.
Interested to hear about the process of finding and acquiring the archive. So I just sort of wondered, in terms of development, did you look into and know what kind of archive there was available? Because it's so important to a retrospective story like this.
We've done a little bit of kind of digging around, and there are various obviously archive houses you can go to, and a lot of it comes from the big networks in the US, ABC, NBC, all that kind of place. But for the documentary itself, we had a great archive team of archive researchers. I mean, you need specialist researchers ideally for this. So we had a lady called Beatrice Reed, and she and a couple of other people. But it was really it's really important because you can't. We knew. I mean, we had the benefit that they'd been this kind of media sensation, so we knew that there must be archive out there. But it was quite painful digging it out, and certainly I know that after they were found, they were tested at this university. Quite soon after they were found, they were filmed by 3 different cameras in different rooms, giving the same tests and coming back with the same answers and stuff. And we could never find that footage. We knew it was out there and we couldn't find it, and it's kind of still gutting to this day. But I think that's the thing. It's hard to do yourself. I think you do need specialists for these kind of films.
Yeah. Okay, and a sort of bridging question, which will take us into production, I think, in terms of writing it during the development and getting a script together and structure for the film. How did you go about that? I mean, as a retrospective story, did you get it all down on paper? Did you have an idea from the very early days of what the structure of the film was going to be? Was that part of the development?
I think it's a really good question, and I think that this is, there is a real distinction. Someone who comes from a background of kind of actuality, observational documentaries. What I've learned working at Raw, where I've been for like 7 years, is that they're almost like different genres: retrospective filmmaking, which interview and archive, and reconstruction, if you use it, versus actuality. They're just completely different, tonally, pacing wise. In terms of like POV and things like that, they're completely different. And if you're an actuality filmmaker looking to make one of those kind of films, it's really worth kind of completely reconsidering your approach. An actuality film, I would go in with kind of an idea of the film I wanted to make, but I would kind of like let everything just kind of happen and try and piece it together much more in the edit. With a retrospective film, what I've learned is the more planning you can do, the better. So I knew about 60% of what is in the film. We knew the backstory quite well, or a lot of the backstory. And so we could spend a long time kind of piecing that together. Grace did this incredible job of creating this timeline. It was like 20-page Word document of this incredible timeline, putting all the beats and story in different colors and stuff together. And then sat down with Tom and, the other execs, and really thought about, what, aside from story, what is this film about? And the big themes that we talked about, nature versus nurture, and that the film's going to have a thematic arc as well as a kind of narrative arc. So when you're doing a retrospective story, the more planning you can do, the better. It doesn't mean you go into interview completely kind of prescriptive and like you have to say this. I want you to say this at all. You let those interviews go in ways wherever they take you, but that there are certain beats that you're aiming to hit. And quite often it's not even the big moments of emotion or the big kind of revelations, because like any decent filmmaker is going to get those. It's connective tissue. If you're not going to use a narrator, you have to have people say really boring stuff like, 3 weeks later we were working in a restaurant together, or Eddie was the best looking one out of the three of us, or whatever, that kind of stuff. Or things that allow you to, or we got married in this year or whatever. You need that information to kind of piece it together. Otherwise, you'll end up Frankenbiting horribly in the edit. So, really planning stuff in advance is really makes sense, but also being open to new things. In terms of moving on into production, we should talk about, let me look at what I've got on my list here to talk about. We started in April 2017 with the master interviews. And as I've been saying, the more prep you can do for these, the better. It's obviously really important that people feel comfortable in that, but I think the more prepped you are, the more you kind of have an idea of where you're going with the story. People kind of relax into it because they're like, oh, you know what you're doing, kind of thing. Whereas if you're a bit like, tell me about this, it isn't necessarily very helpful. I
just want to take you back before we get into that, Tim.
Sure.
Just quickly back to the idea that you touched on before about kind of, getting the boys, getting Bobby and David and the families on board, and how important their trust in you was. So, how did you, and you actually just said that, you went in feeling it was perhaps 50-50. How did you go about maintaining their trust? How, is it just about open, honest transparency? What was your approach to that?
God, it's so difficult, isn't it? Trust is everything in documentary. Whether you make actuality or retrospective, whatever, it's everything. And I think it does come down to how you relate to people on a kind of really basic human level. Outside, if you stripped away the filmmaking and everything, do they feel that they would be comfortable having a conversation with you? And I think part of that again comes down to, well, certainly meeting people as much as possible before you've done interviews, before you're sort of getting into the filmmaking process. That's really helpful, and having as many conversations as you can without kind of spoiling the sense that you're going over it, that they're telling the story as fresh as they can. I think it's also about planning the interview. So you don't start with, obviously, the most kind of dramatic, painful stuff. You kind of take them through the story. That's what I see my job as, is to take them through their story, to facilitate the telling of their story by them. And generally, chronologically is quite a good way to do that. Again, when you're doing retrospective interviews, the key thing is that you don't want people to jump out of the moment. So you want them, even though they're talking in the past tense, you want them to talk in the past tense as they experience a story. It's really important. If they kind of suddenly jump forward to hindsight and they start saying, well, if I'd known then what I know now, kind of thing, it's really not helpful, and it doesn't work. It kind of breaks you out. So it's all about keeping them in the moment, and it very much like, look, I'd say, take me back to the first day of college. You know, tell me try and remember every detail. What were you wearing? What was it like? What the smells you can remember? All that kind of forensic detail just helps like situate them back in that place.
And I think that's so important, isn't it? Because their emotion of the moment is what makes those interviews so key in some ways, isn't it? They take us as viewers really back to those moments, and you really feel it and believe it. But how did you? I'm sort of interested that we've talked about how we prepare them. How did you prepare yourself for those? Because they were pretty mammoth sessions, weren't they? Those interview sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're doing this kind of documentary, you want a day with each, your central contributor at the front, and you definitely want a pickup interview later in, which we did. We did a day with each of them at the front, and then we did like half a day with them at the end. This is formal sit-down interviews. You prep like mad. You write. I sort of, at Raw, they do tend to kind of write out a script. So it is like, this is the dream kind of scenario, and when you're doing it that there's no way they're going to say this, right? And it's been fascinating. A lot of actuality directors I've worked with since, and myself, to be honest, really struggle with that, because you're just like, this is fantasy, this is a complete waste of time. But it really isn't, because it forces you to kind of think about the kind of questions you'll need and the kind of sync that you need to get. I locked myself in Peckham Library for like 2 weeks. It was kind of totally miserable. I sat there with a laptop and just kind of, at the time I'm just like, I hate this. This is a total waste of time. But in the interview, it was completely freeing. Like, I never referred to the script, but in my head, I was like, oh, I need this bit to explain this bit and this bit to explain that bit. And so even as an actuality filmmaker and a documentarian, it may go against every instinct you have to kind of plan things to that degree. It's totally worth it. It really is. Because when you come to doing the interview, you'll just be much more comfortable, and they'll pick up on that level of comfort. They won't feel that you're kind of grasping. They feel like the story inside out, and you're helping them deliver it in the best way possible.
How much do you think, do you think that there's an element of Americans are very good at telling their stories? Or did you coach them to be good at delivering it? Did you help them through? I
think that there's no question that, and this is the first film I made in the States, that Americans just are brilliant storytellers. You pick a random selection of the population, and like 9 out of 10 of them will be able to tell their story. And there's just a lack of any inhibition when it comes to, it's not like they all want to be famous. That's a misconception. I think it's that they understand the value of storytelling. America's a country built on stories, and they're like, I own my story. My story is worth something. And if you're going to listen to me, I'm going to tell you that story in the best way possible. And they've grown up on, TV and movies, and they kind of, it's in the blood. Whereas in the UK, you can have the best contributor ever, but there's a kind of, because of the way we are, there's a kind of natural reticence that you have to get past, which is like, oh, I shouldn't really, I don't want to, I shouldn't be sharing my story in some way, even if they really want to. And increasingly that drives me absolutely nuts, because I'm just like, just I can see you want to share your story, just, share it in the best way possible. But that's what makes us, unique as Brits, I guess. But in terms of, you want things to feel natural and not forced. And I think I just said, look, imagine you're at a bar and someone comes up and they're trying to make chit chat with you, and they're like telling you stories, and you're like, okay, look, I've got a story which will beat that. And you're trying to regale them with this story in the most entertaining, truthful, but most entertaining way possible, in that kind of relaxed manner. And that's what I was kind of aiming for. And sometimes they got it, and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they slipped into just kind of, I don't know, the energy drops post lunch quite often and things like that. You've just got to, then you just take a pause, or you have a break, cycle back around. You've got to be conscious constantly as you're interviewing, like, is this at the level it needs to be? If it isn't, then let's shake things up. Let's go back. You can jump around the timeline. It's fine to do that.
How I'm going to ask you this question a bit later on as well, because I don't know if the answer is immediately, but how soon after doing interviews did you know, once you'd done the interviews, that what you had was good?
No, I mean, honestly, I'm like my own worst critic, as I'm sure most filmmakers are. And I was like, this is a bit rubbish. I'm not sure I've got it. Like, I knew there were some good bits, but I was like, this is a 90-minute film. Like, I don't think I've got this at all. And it was only, we were editing while the filming was happening. So I brought the rushes back, and the editor, who we should talk about later, actually, he just said to me, like, it was like day one or day two, he just said, this is extraordinary. We will never work on a story like this again in our entire lives. And these guys have absolutely delivered. And he could see it, even though I couldn't. So that was really reassuring. One thing I'd really like to talk about that I think people aren't aware is point of view. So in drama storytelling, point of view is absolutely crucial. It's like, who is telling the story? Who are we with? Screenwriters will talk about it endlessly. In actuality filmmaking, observational filmmaking, POV is less important. It is still relevant, but quite often, if you're in a scene with like 5 people, the camera is kind of sort of like omniscient, and you're kind of like, it doesn't really matter. With retrospective documentary making, point of view is like everything, okay? And a common mistake you see people will do will like cut between loads of different people telling, an event. I did it once in the previous film I made, which was called One Killer Punch, and we had a house party where tragically a boy had died. We had all these brilliant interviews with these kids from this house party, and they were all, we cut them up so they were all sort of telling the story at the same time, and it was just confusing. And eventually, and it took a long time to get to this point, the commissioner was like, why don't you just pick one of them and have them tell the story, and then you can rewind and tell it from the point of view of another one if you want. And it was like a light bulb moment. And, so that sort of ping-ponging you really want to avoid. It's like, stick with one person, let them tell the story for a period of time before you jump onto someone else.
It's not a chronological retelling, is it?
Yeah, I mean, look, chronology is important, and things have to make sense and have to connect and have to add up to something. But if you want to make a great film, it's the emotion that you've got to get to, and the truth of that. And that doesn't just mean people crying. That means, all different kinds of emotions. And I would argue that this film is quite unusual in that there's a huge tonal variation. Most films start off, they establish a tone at the top and they stick with it. And this one really changes. And that was always something we wanted to go for. It's quite tricky to do. And the editor played a massive role in that. But yeah.
How important was that kind of, you say chronology is important, but we start the film at a certain point, which is not at the start of the story in some way. So how important was that to choose that point in chronology to start?
That's a good question. Well, it's all about POV, right? So, and it's very interesting. So a lot of people, some of the biggest criticisms of this film have been that it's manipulative, and that the editing is kind of tricksy, and that we're trying to, this kind of roller coaster ride. And actually, when you look at it, it's very simple what we've done pretty much. We have told the film from the brothers' perspectives. So that means that we are sharing with the audience information as it was revealed to the brothers. So when they discover that we start with Bobby, when he discovers that there's another man who looks just like him and is probably his twin brother, then we reveal that. When they discover there's another one, then we reveal that. When they discover they were part of an experiment, then we reveal that. Now, it feels, watching it as the audience, like a bit of a roller coaster, like, where did that come from? But that's because we're aligning you with their viewpoint. The POV, we're restricting the POV. The more sort of current affairsy way to do this would be more like an article where you go, here's everything we know about the story. And there's another film that someone's made kind of about this case, where they kind of open by going, in 1952, a scientist dreamed up this experiment, and they just kind of started with that. But for me, these guys, they wanted us to feel what they felt, and they believe their story is entertaining, and they wanted people to experience the emotion they went through. So we're restricting the viewpoint and the knowledge base to their POV, and that's so we start. He says at the top of the film, he says, the story began when I was born, but the real story began when I was 19 years old and I went to college, and that's because at the start of the film, he only knows, his story gets interesting at 19. That's the point. Hitchcock said, film his life with the boring bits cut out. And for Bobby, the boring bits were everything up until he was 19, and then his life went crazy. Now, subsequently, he discovers that there was a lot of crazy stuff going on in his life beforehand that he didn't realize was going on. But we only reveal that when he discovers it for himself.
So how, I mean, you touched on layers being important, and it is a human emotional story that drives it, but there is also a journalistic layer. There's kind of history. How did you choose to put the human story first? Was it just very obvious to you that that's what had to lead it?
I think that's just my instincts. There's definitely there's a much more journalistic take. And actually the producer who on the ground was producing the film, after when we moved into production, Grace stood down and Becky Reed came on, the producer, did an unbelievable job. And she's trained as a journalist, and her instincts were much more journalistic. And the combination of the two was quite helpful, I think. She was always pushing more the kind of revelation story angle, whereas I was more like, what about the human emotional side? And it was a great combination, although we disagreed quite a lot making it. It was a really good combination. I want to show you a clip. She found the key revelation, or one of the key things that happened when we were making the film, is that Becky managed to turn up this person who'd never spoken on camera before, who was the assistant to the scientist who who created this experiment. And Becky found her just by sheer kind of force of will. She found her on like page 17 of a Google search. Like, who goes to the point when you're searching for something, who goes to page 17? But Becky went to page 17 and found her. And I remember she called me, I was in the gym, and she was like, I think I found his assistant. And because it was late, she said there were people like cleaning around her when she found this. And she called her instantly. We were like, she's going to be dead, she's not going to be alive or whatever. Or she's going to be senile or something like that. And the assistant was like, yeah, I'll talk to you. And we were just like, this is incredible. And this assistant appears at the halfway point of the film and kind of, it really is the person who allows us to explore the nature-nurture thing.
How important was she? Back to the question I asked you before. Once you filmed her, did you think, okay, here we go, we've got something really interesting here?
I to be honest, I never think that until the film's done. I still, I knew that had gone well, and she was an amazing find. We didn't, at that point, I had no idea where she'd be positioned in the film at all. That's why, however much you plan, I didn't plan for her. When I wrote a script before we started filming, I had no idea she was going to turn up, but no idea where she'd play in the film. And that's where the editor kind of comes into play, really. Yeah. Okay.
Should we just, I'll just take some questions before
Sure.
I think the timing wise, we probably need to be thinking about moving on to the kind of the next phase, but just some questions that come in. Did you face any opposition to the film getting made from the adoption agency or other bodies?
I mean, the adoption agency was long since gone, so not from them. I think there was a major paranoia from us that, that some of the people involved in this were very, very powerful and are very powerful in certain circles, particularly in New York. And there were people we'd speak to say, oh yeah, I'll definitely talk to you. And then suddenly they just go dead, and we'd have no idea why they weren't talking to us anymore, and someone who'd clearly spoken to them. And a large part of the process of kind of making the film was kind of trying to get beyond that paranoia, because it's kind of quite paralyzing. You're like, we can't contact anyone. But certainly we've been warned by enough people that, we get shut down somehow, and it definitely happened before with previous networks where people high up the networks had kind of pulled the plug on it. Luckily, Channel 4 and CNN didn't do that at any point, but there was some weird stuff that happened, definitely.
Okay, and just a technical question here. How did you film the interviews? Did you use a mirror box?
Yes, we did use a mirror box. I mean, with TV these days, it's become quite ubiquitous, and some would say a bit hackneyed. But if you want to create an emotional connection with your audience, there is no better way than using it. We only used it for the main contributors. Everyone else is the eye line is off. And certainly, also, if you're ever doing one of these documentaries, retrospective interview, shoot 2 cameras. Just don't even question it. Your PM will say, oh, it's an extra, however much. It will save you so much money in the edit, because you won't have to cover everything with GVs or archive or whatever. Always have a second camera. And the other thing I would say is think about your framing. I mean, that's my one frustration actually is that if I'd known it was going to play theatrically as much as it did, I would have framed it wider. So a TV framing is more like what you're looking at now, kind of thing. You know, a lot of stuff plays out like that, or even like that. On cinema, that is like pretty in your face, like on a massive cinema screen. So actually having a smaller screen, having a wider frame, if you're confident it's going to play in cinema, is a good idea. The danger being, if it plays on TV, it can be a bit distancing, and people are like slightly isolated in the frame. But definitely worth considering.
Would you use Interatron again? Do you think the kind of benefit of kind of personal connection outweighs the slightly hackneyed kind of feel of it?
I personally would, but that's me. You know, I am interested in the aesthetics of filmmaking, but for me, the emotion and the emotional connection always triumphs. So I don't care if people say, "Oh, it looks a bit trad," and you film them against a neutral trad photography backdrop. I just don't care. You know, that's a sort of secondary consideration to me. I mean, if I'd had more money, I would have probably done something more interesting with the background, and like I had an interesting idea for a kind of wall of mirrors thing, a bit like kind of Bruce Lee. If ever anyone's ever seen that, just kind of, I think we could have done something more interesting with the background, but it was important. It was like a neutral place. I didn't want to film them at home. They had to exist out of time compared to everyone else. And actually, it's a really important moment, about 2/3 of the way through the film, after Eddie's died, where they get up and they walk out of the interview, and there's a transition into more of an actuality film for the final third.
Just finally then, before we move on to this, maybe we've touched on the interviews and the archive. The recon, how important and how early on did you realise that you wanted to use, if it's not too dirty a word, recon?
So recon, yeah. There is a school of thought in documentary, and particularly in the US, where they can be more puritanical than the kind of hardcore obs crew in the UK, that you should never use recon. And I just don't agree with that. I think it's whatever it takes to tell the story in the best possible way. And once the triplets became famous, there was a lot of archive covering stuff, but up until that point, there wasn't that much coverage. And so you're either using, you're using sort of generic stills or archive from the time, which is not very satisfactory, or recon is just an obvious thing to go for. It just felt to me like the most dramatic way of doing it. I'd also say that where that isn't successful for me, talking is notoriously like difficult to kind of do reconstruction on. As soon as you fall into acting, you're in a world of pain. And as I say, DP Tim Cragg is like brilliant. He's done loads of these things where there are certain shots you just want to avoid, like mid-shot or anything where, you know, really you're on faces for too long, or people are obviously acting. You know, it's impressionistic. These are kind of bodies in space that are kind of standing in for this kind of narrative you're creating. And you get, like, every director, I'm working on a series at the moment where I'm executing, and the directors who have gone out and shot recon, and every director, and I include myself in that, will always put more recon in and more acting, and you just have to strip it back mercilessly until you're with the bare minimum where you can't see. You have to be so disciplined about that, because it's really easy for it to come a kind of crap sort of,
and avoid dialogue at all costs.
Oh god, yeah. Unless you're doing it with proper actors, and, like, you know, a really great writer has written it, don't ever have people speaking. Definitely.
Should we talk about the editing, Tim? You've touched on it, but it's, you know, clearly such a vital and important part of the process. Had Michael ever done anything like this before? Had he?
No, he hadn't. And I would say my number one tip, if you're going to make a feature documentary and you want it to be successful, is hire Michael Hart, if you can. He is a youngish, he's in his 30s, Irish editor. We met on a series that Tom looks after now at Raw, called Heathrow, Britain's Busiest Airport, which is obviously quite different to this. And I didn't hire him. One of the team, the series director, hired him, and he's just talented. You could see straight away. He just has it, whatever it, you know, that ability to storytell. We gave him, I remember on that series where I first met him, we gave him the sort of dregs and the material we had, and he cut the best film in, like, you know, double quick time. So, you know, there are a few feature doc editors, and he's now established as a feature doc editor. For this, he wasn't at all. Fortunately, he'd done some drama editing in Ireland, I think, and I managed to persuade Channel 4 and CNN Films to give me a shot with him. I think if it hadn't been working out, they would have probably cut him quite early on from the process. But I mean, his understanding and his just sense of pace and rhythm and sort of, he's interested in cinema. He'll watch drama films as much as he will do TV docs, and just transform the film. I do have I might not show this clip because it's quite long, but what he's very good at is just the reveal of information. Again, when you're in retrospective space, the objective is to kind of keep the story moving as quickly as possible. There's much less fat on those kind of films than there is on the actuality doc. You have to keep the story moving, and you have to give people the minimum amount of information to understand what's going on and to be engaged, but keep it moving. And you have to cut all extraneous kind of information. He's brilliant at just kind of dropping in little bits of information that then pay off later in the story.
I wonder if we should take some questions quickly before moving on to the release, Tim, because we've got 10 minutes left. So Tobias is asking about editorial control between Channel 4 and CNN. Was it hard working between them?
Good, very good question. It was okay, actually, and generally I think we were because the film was like, even from early days, it was in a good state in the edit. Michael cut the whole thing. This is worth going into. That before I started making the film, I went to a talk just before I was about to start filming at Sheffield, or a Sheffield organised talk, and these directors were saying that you want to allow a minimum of 21 weeks editing for a 90-minute feature. Michael cut this in 18, but that was like working weekends and like doing crazy overtime. But yeah, it was in pretty good state at the first few viewings, and so it was relatively easy. There were a few disagreements about the local cuts that the different broadcasters had. Channel 4 had a different view of it than CNN, kind of thing. In the end, actually, we ended up showing the full length one. But for the cinema film, there was pretty much agreement on all of it. So that was fine. But it is worth bearing in mind, if you've got multiple funders, that's for sure.
Alison is asking, how do you manage the relationships after the film? Do you remain in touch with David and Bobby? That sort of pushes into the next section in some ways, doesn't it? But throughout the process.
I don't think you can kind of cut off contact. I've never been that kind of person. I'm still in contact with people. The guy I made my first film with, I don't know, 15, more than that, God, a long time ago. Anyway, so no, we're really still very close, and even the sort of peripheral people in the film, more peripheral, like Aunt Hetty, who's David's aunt, who's kind of the sort of wise voice of kind of morality in the film. Still in contact with her as well.
Okay, great. Is there anything in the film that, in retrospect, you would have liked to have gone, like you feel you didn't cover, or is it kind of?
There's an element of compression we do, again, for just keeping the story moving and just for clarity, so that Newbow was the scientist behind this, but there was also the chief psychiatric consultant at the adoption agency is this woman called Viola Bernard, and they were really good friends, and they kind of dreamt it up a bit together, and we kind of conflated. She isn't mentioned in the film. She sort of conflated with the agency because she was the main person at the agency. So it would have been nice to have time to do that, but I personally don't feel that it's lost anything by not going into her. The agency, which she was kind of a senior member, is kind of rightly criticised in the film. There's a doc series in all the revelations and all the people and all the characters connected to this, but I wanted to do it. I'd rather do a film which has a surplus of narrative and too much going on, and people want to watch it like 2 or 3 times, rather than drag it out to like 8 parts for a streamer.
Yeah, I think that's important as well, isn't it? There are stories within stories and places to go with all of these things, but clarity of narrative is so vital.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's what Michael taught me. That you can't cram everything in, and being really ruthless it feels painful doing it, but it's really helpful for an audience. They need to be, particularly again with the retrospective film, you're leading them through it. You really are. They are less open to interpretation than an actuality doc where there's lots going on at the same time and you have to sort of choose what you're focusing on in the frame. You are being led through it. That is the reality of it. You can interpret it in different ways, but it's more directive. And to do that, you have to have real clarity in what you're doing and economy in the storytelling.
Okay, should we move on to the kind of sale and release, because we're running rapidly out of time. So tell us about what happened once you'd finished in the edit. Tell us about the journey, just kind of.
So we're in the edit. We'd submitted it to Sundance, the film festival, which is like probably the biggest film festival for independent film in the world. And we've been told that the chance of getting in, you got a better chance of getting into Harvard than you do into Sundance. And one day we'd had actually quite a difficult viewing with one of our funders, having said they all went well. And Michael and I were sitting there depressed, and it was like about 7 o'clock, and suddenly my phone rang and it said, always remember it said Beverly Hills, California. And I picked it up, and someone was like, "Hey, we're from Sundance, you got into the film festival." And we were like, ecstatic. Had no idea really what that meant, but thought it was incredible. And it's essentially what festivals are, is a kind of a shop window for your film. So you take it there, and luckily, before we went there, various people got interested. They'd seen, cut of the film. And so there's a sales agent in New York called Submarine, which are kind of like the sales agent for feature documentaries, run by these two brothers who coincidentally are twin brothers, exactly the same age as the triplets, who grew up at the same time as them in New York. Well, they didn't know them, but knew of the restaurant and stuff. So that helped. And so all of us jumped on a plane and went out to Sundance. So this is the premiere at Sundance. So a load of us jumped on a plane and went out to Sundance, including Tom. None of us knew really what to expect. Raw had a big feature scripted film called American Animals, which is a great film that was kind of playing there as well. So the focus wasn't really on us that much. Anyway, this is the premiere, and it seemed to go okay. And we all thought, I think, that it would just be, a modest, success, hopefully. And basically, Darren Aronofsky, the film director, tweeted about the film just as it sort of closed, the premiere. And after that, basically the next 10 days were complete insanity. My phone didn't stop ringing. Random Hollywood agents and producers trying to get hold of the scripted narrative rights of the film. People chasing, wanting to buy the film. The people at Sundance sort of told us that, for the later screens, there were queues and people were physically having physical fights to get in. And someone told us they hadn't seen it that mental since Napoleon Dynamite, like, I don't know, whatever it was, 10 years previously. So it just went completely nuts. And I think I just hoped that we were going to go out and do a bit of snowboarding and kind of, enjoy it. But it went totally crazy. And as a result, and it got picked up by Neon, who are a theatrical distributor, mainly do drama traditionally. They did I, Tonya, they had Parasite last year, they won the Oscar. They picked up, we have various offers from different people, but we kind of like them. And they launched it in June 2018 in the States. It coincided fortuitously with a very hot summer. And it just, it went nuts. And particularly in the States, I think it ended up taking about $12.5 million at the box office, which for a doc is kind of pretty amazing. I mean, there were a load of docs that year, Free Solo and RBG, that also, and Won't You Be My Neighbor, which also made over $10 million. So it was a pretty crazy year for docs in general. But I think, if you compare it to, I think it took more than Amy and Man on Wire, and maybe Senna combined. I can't remember, but it was, we just assumed maybe we'd play in a festival and maybe, a few people would see it. And it's the one thing I would say that was an extraordinary experience for me, that, someone who makes TV docs and loves TV, you watch your film go out, you get a review in The Guardian if you're lucky, you watch people talk about it on Twitter and it's a real buzz, but nothing can really compare to sitting in a dark room full of people who've paid to come see your film and seeing them react, cry and laugh, and particularly American audiences, they're just so vocal. It's just such a thrill. You're kind of, you feel like you've kind of, you're entertaining them and you're educating them, and it's just it's just such a buzz. It's kind of hard to explain. And also then, forget viewing figures, seeing the box office receipts roll in, we made, $3 million this weekend. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. So that was, and being completely honest, it's something that's unlikely to be repeated in my career. And I think we all know that, it was a one-off, and it was an amazing experience.
Watching it for that first time at Sundance was quite incredible, wasn't it? Because it kind of, the boys took the viewer, it was seeing people go on that journey of the first 20 minutes of the film, feeling good about what they were watching and all of the emotions and the roller coaster, and then that sudden twist, and kind of actually seeing that in a dark room, as you say, was quite something. It was a real experience. Was it something you actually enjoyed? Did you manage to take stock and
not at the time, because I was really worried the brothers' relationship was really ropey, and I was also worried, how it was going to play when they got on the stage. Of course, they came out on stage with us, and no one was remotely interested in us. They just wanted to hear from them. People were hugging them and, apologising on behalf of, America for what had happened to them and stuff. It was later on, when the film was released in the States, I snuck into a couple of screenings and just watched it from the back, and it's kind of like, I tried to kind of enjoy it a bit more, just because I love going to the cinema and I enjoy that. It's a very different experience to having your film go out on TV, and I really hope other people get the opportunity. One thing I would say is that touring the film in festivals in the States has made me realise how good the level of documentary filmmaking is in the UK, and that there are, it's so much better than other countries. Just the base level, any day of the week there'll be a doc which could make it into a festival in the UK, in the US easily. And I really hope other people get the opportunity that we've had, because I do think there's that talent base in TV, and not just in TV, but other filmmakers who are working in the UK, because we've just got a tradition of kind of documentary filmmaking that means that there's a great base of knowledge and kind of skill and I hope more people get the opportunity to kind of make that leap into cinema stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we're probably...
Should we do some questions? Done for time over a little bit, can't we?
Okay, well, I was just going to go to some other questions here. Someone saying they missed the cinema. Too right, absolutely. Someone saying, always struggle with building relationships with contributors and then having to include things that are less favourable. How did you approach this kind of issue? So did you, and also did you show the boys the film before it kind of went out?
It's a really good question. It is tricky. I think it's all about how you establish a relationship at the top, and you're just like, look, I always try and have that talk of doom and say, look, I'm going to be, honest about the kind of film I'm trying to make. There's probably going to be things in there that you won't like as much, but I think overall you'll like it. And that is the spirit in which we're entering into this relationship. We did go, me and Dimitri, one of the executive producers, flew out to show them the film separately. They weren't really talking, and it was very emotional. And they both of them came up after it finished. They sort of came over to me and just gave me a hug, and it was really weird. They were like, you did what you said you were going to do. And it wasn't like the fact that they liked the film or didn't like the film. They did like it, which was fine. But it was more that I'd sort of followed through. And I think they'd had so many people let them down that was the bigger release for them. It was like, you said you were going to make this film and you did. Thank you. And so I think, being as transparent and honest with people at the top is really important. But it was a bumpy road with them, and they were really difficult contributors. I mean, unbelievably, Becky and Grace did an incredible job wrangling them. Really, really tough. I mean, obviously now they love us and they, it's all fine. But, the process is often incredibly painful.
And not just the film here, but can you talk on what it's done for their relationship? So, they were happy with the film, but it's also been good for them, hasn't it?
That's the thing. So at Sundance, the question that I was dreading was like the third question. Someone in the audience said, well, what's your relationship like? And they were like, look, it's a work in progress, but the process of making this film and watching it has made us reflect on things. And it's brought us much closer together. And so that's been a lovely, unexpected byproduct. That wasn't our intention making the film, but they're now, I don't know, they play golf once a fortnight or something together, and they're definitely, and their families are much closer than they have been for a long time.
Quite a few people are asking, Grace didn't finish the project, so what and Becky came on board, what happened with Grace? She went off.
we've absolutely offered Grace the chance to work on it. I think that she wanted to be a director, and she's become a director, and she's a very talented director. So she got an offer. I think she got an opportunity to make her first film for the BBC around that time, and chose to do that. There was kind of no ill feeling, and we've kind of stayed in touch, and she's come along for Q&As. The only reason she wasn't at Sundance was that she was having a baby around that time, or had just had a baby. But certainly, I'm really keen that everyone recognises her huge contribution to it. I mean, it would never have happened without her, that's for sure.
Quite a few people are asking if there's any follow-up on this film.
Look, I think there is probably a follow-up that could be made. I don't think I'm the person to do that. I mean, it's been like, I don't know what now, probably 7 years of my life. And I'm fascinated by the story still, but I just, for my own sanity, have to kind of move on. I do think there'll be other revelations that come out over time. And certainly after the film came out, we had some twins find each other that had been separated at the age of, I think they were 52 or 54, met after watching the film for the first time. One of them started looking into their history, being adopted from the same adoption agency, Louise Wise Services. So the film ended up having this kind of real world kind of life after it finished. And yes, there is definitely more still to be done there, but probably not by me.
Let's see what else we've got. Lots of people saying fantastic session. Thanks, guys. That's really nice.
Cheers.
Glad you've enjoyed it. Let's see. How's it changed you, Tim, as a filmmaker? Do you think? That's from me. What's it done for the way you approach things?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously it's opened up all kinds of opportunities I never had before. It's given me a bit more faith in my own abilities. I think all of us as filmmakers, there is a degree of self-doubt. If you don't have self-doubt when you're making films, then you're probably not making very good films, in my opinion. But it has taught me, well, I think what I said before, just that how fortunate we are, those of us in the UK, to have kind of come from this incredible tradition of documentary filmmaking here, and realise that the standard here is really good. So if you're making anything that's making it, onto TV or onto, content that's being seen in the UK in any meaningful way, then you're probably in the top kind of 5% of documentary filmmakers in the world, and you should be more confident in your own abilities and your abilities to kind of make films for either theatrical release or for US. And I would say it look beyond the UK film industry. Documentary industry is incredible, and it's really tight knit and brilliant and supportive and all those kind of things. And all my best friends are pretty much from it. But there is a world outside of that. There is a world outside of Channel 4 and BBC and even Netflix. And it's worth being open to that, because it's exciting out there.
Great. Okay. I think, unless there's anything else you want to say, Tim, specifically.
Not really. I hope people have found this session useful, and if you take away nothing, I would just really try and think about retrospective filmmaking versus actuality and the differences, and watch films and try and analyze, because the best retrospective films there's a real art to making them, and hopefully I've given you some of the kind of tips that I picked up working at Raw making this film. But there's a shortage of people in the UK who are making those kind of films at the moment. And this Netflix series I'm just executing at the moment, it was hard to find people who have that kind of experience. And definitely keep making actuality films. Actuality filmmaking is, for me, the pinnacle and the hardest thing to do. But do be open to kind of different forms of storytelling, even if it means making a film for a US cable network that you're not kind of thrilled about. Just have that experience, and it'll probably make you a better filmmaker. And come and speak to us at Raw if those are the kind of films that you want to make. Absolutely.
We're ideas and what we do come from everywhere all the time, and so we are always wanting to hear from people. So do come and speak to us. Drop us a line anytime.
Thanks very much, everyone. I hope you have a good lockdown Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? Yeah, it is.
It is. Bye, everybody. Thanks very much.